Hi everybody, Mitch Coodley here. I've created this short demo to show you how to build and layer guitar parts, especially backing parts that you can edit and orchestrate with in order to arrange a complete piece. This is useful in songwriting where you're supporting vocals, and in underscores, production music, and TV music where you're supporting picture, voiceovers, or dialogue. So without a melody, this is a good way to provide interest and variety and contrast. Between your acoustic and electric parts and effects, we can easily create a complete tapestry by layering the various parts. This example is geared toward both guitarists and non-guitarists. I'm using Logic Pro and I'm getting most of my effects right from the Logic plugins, so you can easily recreate this kind of thing at home. So let's get started. First, let's hear the piece, then I'll show you the various parts. Okay, now that we've heard the piece, let's take a look at the individual parts. And we'll start with the acoustic guitar, which is the intro, and I'll play it for you dry first. I've tried to create a little bit of a non-standard voicing for this A chord in the intro, and I'm taking advantage of the fact that we're in the key of A. I get to let the low A string ring out until the third bar where the D string rings out. Meanwhile, the B string rings out and rubs against the C sharp next to it, creating a major second rub. And then with my high D and C sharp that I fret with my pinky in the 10th and 9th fret, I'm able to create further 9ths and 7ths intervals. So this just adds a little more atmosphere and vibe. And then I've gone ahead for processing and added basically a telephone filter to these opening bars. So this is a nice effect. It kind of focuses your ear right away onto that little intro sound. And also it's small, it's mono, and it's lo-fi. And that gives us a little bit of an explosion when we reach bar 5 and the band comes in. Then we get a full stereo field and all the frequencies come in. So let's just take a listen to that transition. So we got some nice contrast there. Then I brought in a very basic standard acoustic strumming part just to kind of motor it along. And I'm going to bring back that strum in the next section. But it just moves it along, motors it along in the key of A, sits in the mid-range and allows me to create parts either above or below it, and I'm going to do both of those later. So underneath I have these dyads that I have panned hard left and right, and I'm calling this electric guitar 1. And you'll notice they're very simple 2 notes. In bar 5, the A and C sharp are played, and then it moves up the chord tones, C and C sharp and E. And I'm also letting the open E string ring, so at times there are 3 notes, but really I'm doubling the E with 1 fretted and 1 open. So dry it sounded like this, one part. And here's the second part. And both together. So it's basically the same part panned left-right, but I've probably changed the sound or the pickup from one to the other to get a little bit of a different sound. Then I've put it through my amp plugins, maybe added some compression and some 8th note delays, and together that sounds like this. And remember, I still have the acoustic strumming part going as well as bass and drums. And then at measure 9, I bring in the low crunch part, very standard root and 5th. So at this point we have the more or less high register dyads, the mid-range acoustic strumming part. I bring in my low power 5ths, bass and drums, and together it sounds like this. Then, as a transition into the next section, I've used snippets of a riff that I've played in full over here with parts panned hard left and right. Then what I've done is I've taken this whole riff as I played it and I've strip silenced it. And in Logic we go into the audio window and we choose strip silence. And basically this is a digital gating feature. So you'll now see this overview of all the new waveforms that are created. From one big one, it stripped the silence from between the audio bits and gives you new regions that you can now move around, and there's a lot of parameters to adjust to get the kind of gating you'd like. The nice thing about this, first of all, by having those individual regions, they're almost like samples. You can move them around, cut and paste, edit them later creatively. The second thing is it's giving me very hard gating between regions, so that gives it a little bit more of a mechanical sound, which is what I want, and it kind of telegraphs to the listener that this is a contemporary part. So going back to measure 11, I'm going to kind of change things up, get a transition going, and I'll start that out by using one snippet of that riff here. So that kind of gives me a punctuation mark there, and then I'll take that riff and repeat it here but reversed. So this transition section is giving me some contrast and variety and change of density. And what I'll do is to finish off the phrase, I'm going to bring in this one last lick. And that's nothing more than the tail end to the original dyad part we heard back in bars 11 and 12. One side sounded like this, but it's heavily processed with a lot of extra chorus and delay. And of course I've dropped the band out there at bars 15 and 16 so that this nice processed lick is really an exposed flourish to the end of the whole phrase. So by using these little snippets, I've gotten a lot of variety and changes in texture and density. And that gives me not only the contrast that I like, but it's allowed me to do it with very little material. Basically from that one riff or variations of it, I've generated a lot of possibilities for not only parts, but different sections of the song. And by using editing skills, you can really create a lot of music this way. At bar 17, I begin bringing in a series of semi-melodic, single-line pattern parts. There's one on the left in the mid-range, up an octave on the right, and at bar 21 a third part comes in. And they all work together to create a nice texture. Again, on the left side I had a slightly crunchy mid-range part. And then on the right, up an octave, a cleaner delay sound. And lastly, I bring in this third heavily chorused part, and that kind of knits together with the other two. Meanwhile, I've got my acoustic strumming part and the bass and drums moving underneath. Together it sounds like this. At bar 25, I'm going to bring in those riff bits I showed you earlier, the strip silence bits of the full riff. And I'm now using the acoustic for muted parts, these blunted low fifths. And I'm going to bring in the electric part for another muted part with a changing top note. So I've got these two muted parts along with the original riff, and together it sounds like this. And this also shows you how you can mix and match these parts to create different sections. For example, just the riffs by itself could be a nice intro. Or the muted parts by themselves. If I just play that, that would be a nice intro. Especially if this were a vocal tune. So those are nice small moments. If I want to create sort of a climax or a big section, I can just keep adding layers together and see what works. So just as an experiment, I've collected all 8 or 9 guitar parts here at once. I'm not sure how they're going to work, but let's take a listen and see what it sounds like. Alright, so it's a little thick. I probably wouldn't use this in a real situation, but it does prove the point of how you can mix and match layers to create a complete wall of sound and really orchestrate with guitar parts. Because you've got high, middle, and low registers, you've got processed and unprocessed, you have bright versus dark, you've got movement versus sustain. And when you mix and match all those elements of different sound, you really create a lot of contrast and variety just with guitar. And finally, even though this is a demo, we can look at mastering for a second. I'll show you how I might polish this up real quick. So I've saved settings for mastering here, and I'll call those up. And we'll first look at the multipressor, which is a multi-band compressor. And I'm going to want to kind of put a little squeeze on the low end and the high mids there. And then we'll go to the EQ, and we'll apply a high-pass filter, which will pretty much pull out the very low end. And that'll keep our mix from becoming too boomy. Sometimes I'll use the multimeter to check out levels as I'm working. And finally, I want to apply some limiting. I'll use the adaptive limiter to get it to sound as loud as possible. All right, let's check out the finished mix. So there you have it. I hope you've enjoyed this guitar layering demo, and I encourage you all to experiment at home. If you have any questions or comments, again, it's Mitch Coodley. Feel free to email me at mitch@mitchcoodley.com. Take care, guys.